All right, well, we are still in the book of Acts. You've been with us on Wednesday nights, you know that. Last time, so we're on Paul's second missionary journey. Acts chapter 17. Last time we saw Paul and his traveling companions journey to Thessalonica, and from there on to Berea. When he's in Berea, some troublemaking Jews travel from Thessalonica to Berea, causing trouble there, and apparently for Paul's safety, the church there at Berea sends him away to Athens, and so he travels on to Athens. Timothy and Silas, they stay behind in Berea, but they get word from Paul while they're there in Berea that says, hey, come to me as quick as you can in Athens. And so that's where we pick up tonight. That's where we left off last week. Paul is in Athens, and he is waiting on his traveling companions of Timothy and Silas to make it there. All right, so let's pick up verse 16 of Acts chapter 17. Now, while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. Therefore he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers and in the marketplace daily, and with those who happened to be there. Then certain Epicureans and Stoic philosophers encountered him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak, for you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean, for all the Athenians and foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or hear something new." Sounds like I've known some of those people too. All right, so Paul is in Athens. What's he doing in Athens? Why is he there? Or what's he doing there? Yeah, that's what Landon said when he read the first question. What was he doing in Athens? He was preaching. Yeah, I know he was preaching, but I mean more, what was the circumstances that found him in Athens? Do what? Why was he there? That's what, yeah. Yeah, he's basically waiting on Silas and Timothy. I almost want to say killing time, except Paul is never just killing time. When Paul is killing time, what's he doing? He's finding somebody to preach to. So while Paul is killing time, waiting on Timothy and Silas, he finds some people to preach to. So, now, his ministry in Athens is similar to his ministry in other towns. What is his basic strategy when he gets to a new town? What's the first thing he usually does? He goes to the synagogue and he starts preaching to the Jews Jesus as the Messiah. So he follows that same strategy in Athens. However, he does something a little bit different in Athens than what we've seen him do before. What is that? Huh? So he goes to the marketplace, he starts sharing with the Gentiles, and he engages in debate, if we want to call it that, with Greek philosophers. So that's something new. We haven't seen him do that before. So he is now engaging with Greek and reasoning with Greek philosophers. Now, two philosophic groups are mentioned here in Acts that particularly that he reasoned with: the Epicureans and the Stoics. So these were kind of two schools of Greek philosophy. Now, if I ask you who were the Epicureans or what did they believe, what would you say? What would you think the Epicureans would have believed? Yes, ma'am. Yes, pretty much. So Epicureans uh, believed that pleasure was the greatest good. In other words, the greatest accomplishment I can do and I can get out of life is pleasure. Now, some people have this misunderstanding that it is just reckless abandonment in the lust of the flesh. But really, that's not what Epicurus taught. It's more pleasure in the sense of avoiding pain. So my greatest good is pleasure, and the way to accomplish pleasure is to avoid pain. So going out and getting drunk on Saturday night may not be the best route to pleasure, because if I wake up with a hangover Sunday morning, then I haven't really avoided pain. So it's pleasure, but it's pleasure as defined by avoiding pain. So as you can imagine, this becomes a very selfish way of life. It's all about me. They were the original me generation, right? It's all about me. So when Paul got up and preached about Jesus, who willingly suffered and died for mankind, this would have been a foreign concept to them. Their first thought would have been, well, why would anyone, particularly the Son of God, want to willingly suffer and take upon himself suffering and pain and death for someone other than himself? So it was a very selfish philosophy, a very selfish religion, if I can frame it in those terms. They didn't believe in the resurrection. Their idea was, why would I want to be? My greatest good would be to somehow rid myself of the flesh, because in the flesh is where pain and suffering comes. If I can somehow be rid of the flesh, then that gets me to a point of greater pleasure, because I'm now rid of the pain and suffering that comes with the flesh. So Paul is talking to them about Jesus suffering and dying on behalf of others and being raised from the dead. And this is kind of a new concept to these people. Now, the other group that's mentioned is the Stoics. Now, if I say someone is stoic, what do I generally mean by that? Yeah, we kind of think of somber, serious. So Stoics believed in a very impersonal God / gods. That the gods created man and then pretty much took their hands off of man, and the gods didn't really want a relationship with human beings. That wasn't something that the gods were interested in. And they also believed, and this is where that idea of, seriousness, no emotion or whatever comes into play. They believed that man's fate is already decided. It's already predetermined. So whatever is going to happen, it's going to happen, whether good or bad. So there's really no point in getting all worked up about it one way or the other. No, getting all excited when things are going great serves really no purpose. Getting all worked up when things seem to be going bad accomplishes nothing, because whatever is going to happen, it's going to happen. It's already predetermined. There's nothing you can do about it. And so the best thing you can do is just, dutifully accept the fate that you've been dealt, and try not to, try to stay on that even keel. Don't let your highs be too high. Don't let your lows be too low. Just stay on that even keel, because whatever's going to happen is going to happen. They also had the belief that man himself is divine. And so when Paul is talking about not an impersonal God, but a personal God who loves us and wants a relationship with us, and we can have joy and peace with him, this was something new to them as well. And these are the groups that Paul is engaging in here in Athens. And so you can tell he's got his work cut out for him, as you can tell. Which is it easier? Let me ask this question. Is it easier to lead someone to Jesus who has never been taught anything about God, or is it easier to lead someone to Jesus who's been taught wrong things about God? It's far easier to lead someone who's never been taught anything about God to Jesus than to try to unteach someone who's been taught the wrong things. So Paul here is engaging with people who have a belief about the divine, but they've been taught wrong. And so he's trying to help them unlearn what they've been taught, and so they can learn the truth in Jesus. Now, how did Paul's message address both views of the Epicureans and the Stoics? Well, he taught the resurrection of the dead. This flew in the face of the Epicureans. He also taught the suffering of Christ on the cross on behalf of others, not just an impersonal God, but one who willingly suffered and died, not just for anybody, but for you and for all of us. He is a God who cares, and because of that, we're also accountable. You see, the Greek philosophers didn't really feel that they were accountable to a God. Stoics believe that God was impersonal. Whatever's going to happen is already going to happen. You know, whatever's going to happen to me, good or bad, it's already been decided. So what I do really doesn't matter. The Epicureans said, you know, what I do really, the gods really don't care one way or another. They created me for pleasure, and so, as long as I'm enjoying life, that's all that matters. But what does Paul's gospel say? It does matter, and we are accountable to this God who not only created us, but loves us and holds us accountable for our actions, good or bad. Questions on those verses? All right, I got a couple. I have a lot of pictures of Athens, but I'll just give you a couple just to kind of give you a little flavoring. This is the Parthenon in Athens. This is a temple that was dedicated to Greek gods. It was also, I think, used as a bank at one time. It's a prominent figure. This is sort of the symbol of Athens. It's one of the great ancient ruins that you can still tour today, and it was certainly there and functioning in Paul's day. All right, let's see the next picture. This is a theater, a forum, if you will, in Athens, the ruins of it. And so Athens was a very civilized city, probably the center of Greek culture rested in Athens. And so Athens was a very culturally rich place. It was a very lively city. Paul certainly had no shortage of people to witness to or subjects to engage people in. Okay. Well, let's look on then, because Paul is sharing with the people in the marketplace. And some of these philosophers hear him and they say, why don't you come to the Areopagus or Mars Hill? You may know it better as that. And speak to us further. And so he goes to Mars Hill and he preaches that famous sermon that we know and love on Mars Hill. Let's take a look. Verse 22. Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you're very religious. For I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, and I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance to this to all by raising him from the dead. Okay, so Paul is invited to the Areopagus. The Areopagus literally means what? The hill of Ares or Mars. So you probably know it better as Mars Hill. But that is the place, and it was a place where philosophers would get together and they would debate. Luke tells us here in Acts that some of their favorite pastime of the Athenians was debating. They loved these philosophical debates. So the favorite hobby people of Athens was debate. I don't like debate. I don't find a lot of merit in it, but they did apparently. And so Paul is going to engage them at their point of contact. So Paul goes and preaches this classic sermon on Mars Hill, and he does it very in a non-threatening way. He goes up, and he's probably thinking as he's climbing up on Mars Hill, as he's coming maybe through the marketplace on his way to Mars Hill, he's perhaps thinking, how can I address these people? These are people who think that they're smarter than anybody else. They think they've got it all figured out. They're just looking for a way to pick my arguments about Jesus apart. How can I start? What can I do to engage them? Some point of contact. And he sees all these idols. And he's looking for an illustration, because a good preacher is always looking for an illustration. And he sees this one altar to the unknown God, just in case they leave one out. And he said, that's my angle. That's my point of contact. And so when he gets up to speak in front of these philosophers, he says, I've noticed that you're all very religious. He's going to kind of start with a compliment, kind of take them, kind of disarm them just a little bit. I've noticed you're very religious. I even noticed that you have an altar to the unknown God. Well, this God that you worship, that you don't know anything about, that's the one I want to tell you about. And his name is Jesus. And he launches into this beautiful gospel presentation. So what are some lessons that we can learn about Paul's witnessing technique that we can apply maybe to our own life and witnessing opportunities? Right, just kind of a... Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Whatever you can find to get in. Boy. Right. Yeah. Anybody else want in on this? Yeah. When I go to someone's house, um, on a visit, particularly a visit where I think the people may be lost, and I'm looking for an opportunity to share the gospel. I go in, and the first thing I do is I start looking for anything I can find that might help me relate to them and get a conversation started. For instance, if I go into someone's house and they've got deer heads hanging on the wall, first thing I think of is they're a hunter. I'm a hunter. So I say, "Oh, you like to hunt? Oh, yeah. Well, where'd you get that? Oh, I got that. Then, well, I shot one in South Texas." And then we're talking. Now, before long, if I can do it right, then we're not talking about hunting anymore. We're talking about Jesus. But I've got to have something to start with. Um, if I go in and I went in this one, and this guy's got just rows and rows of these little NASCAR models everywhere, and I'm like, "Oh, you like NASCAR?" "Oh yeah, I love NASCAR." I said, "Who's your driver?" "Oh, Dale Earnhardt Jr." And we started talking about racing. Well, before long, we're not talking about racing anymore. We're talking about Jesus. But that was my avenue. I went to this one, Lisa and I, on one grow night. It wasn't at this church. It was many moons ago. We went to this house. The woman went to church. She was a believer. The husband was not. I knew he was not. So I knew it was going to be a witnessing opportunity when we went. And I got there and I thought, how am I going to get into this conversation? And I looked around. And I could. There was no deer heads on the wall. There was no NASCAR. There was nothing. But I kept looking, and I'm like, there's a trophy. He's got a trophy case over here. And I'm thinking, what? I couldn't tell. There was some kind of animal or something. I'm like, is it horse race? What? So I asked him, said, "What's all the trophies about?" He said, "Oh, I raise and show dogs, and those are all dog show trophies." Now here's the thing. I know absolutely nothing about showing dogs. Zero. But that night, I acted like I was interested in it. I could care less about it, to be honest with you. But I'm like, "Oh, that's so interesting. Tell me about this one. And what kind of dogs do you raise? And what do you got? And what kind of shows do you do?" And and pretty soon he's disarmed, and he's talking about dogs. And then eventually we're able to steer the conversation towards Jesus. So whatever you can do to engage the person. For Paul, he used what they were already into. He used philosophy. He used debate. And he used their own religion and used it as a point of contact. He adapted his style to fit the audience. How you witness. So I would assume it'd be interesting to hear from our South Asia mission team when they get back. I'm curious to hear the style that they used, because I would assume how you would witness to someone in South Asia who has probably never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ might be very different than how you would witness to someone in Claremore, Oklahoma, who's heard the gospel many times and probably rejected it many times. So the style has to kind of fit the audience that you're talking to. I know in missionaries in Africa, they've got these huge cloths, and it's got the story from creation through the resurrection, and because a lot of them, getting a lot of the villagers may not necessarily be able to read, and being able to get something translated into their language that they can understand, but they understand stories because that culture is very big in telling stories, and so they story out the gospel from these cloths that have the story of the gospel on them. So you adapt your style to fit the audience, but then also important is that the message doesn't change. Paul didn't change the message of the gospel. The message of the gospel was the same that he preached to the Greeks and the Jews, to the philosophers, to to the rabbis. The message of the gospel cannot change. How we present the message is what needs to be adapted there. Questions on that? All right. So if we just kind of briefly outline Paul's sermon on Mars Hill, and again, it's a classic sermon of the New Testament. He starts out by saying this: in all your knowledge, you're ignorant of the one true God. That would be his first point. Second would be this: God created man to seek him. So in other words, you're not, God didn't create you and leave you to your own devices. He created you with a purpose, and that purpose is not your own pleasure. You're created with a purpose, and that is to seek him. Third, God will hold men accountable for their sins. You are responsible and accountable for your actions. To the Stoics, he would say, your life is not a predetermined outcome that you have no choice in. That you do have a choice in how you choose to live your life, and you are accountable and responsible for the actions you take and the decisions that you make. And point 4, life is found through Jesus. The greatest good is not pleasure. The greatest good is not stoicism. The greatest good is following Jesus Christ. That's Paul's sermon. Questions on that? That's a very, very brief summary of his sermon, but in the interest of time, that's as deep as I wanted to jump in it. I got a couple of pictures of Mars Hill here. Look, there's a preacher on Mars Hill. That is Mars Hill, and it's just a big, solid mountain of marble is what it is. That's marble that I'm standing on there. Now, I thought this was an interesting shot because over my shoulder in the distance, you see the Parthenon. You can see the Parthenon. That's the Acropolis, and that little structure that's kind of off by itself to the right, that's the Parthenon. And so, as I say all that to say, as Paul stood on Mars Hill and was preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, he was doing it in view of a pagan temple. And so he kind of brings it into life when he sits there and says, that God who made the world and everything in it, he is Lord of heaven and earth. He doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. There's one right there. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything. But he's literally preaching to pagan idolaters in the shadow of their own pagan temples there. All right, let's see what the next picture is. This is standing on Mars Hill. This is the view of the Areopagus, or not the Areopagus, the Agora, the marketplace. So he's standing on Mars Hill, and he's looking out at the marketplace down below there. Okay. So let's see what the Athenians, what their response was to all this. Verse 32. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. That was the deal breaker. It always seems to be the resurrection of the dead that seems to be the deal breaker for a lot of the people who hear the gospel. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. However, some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius the Areopagite. So in other words, he was one of the ones that was hung out on Mars Hill and debated with them. But he believed, and a woman named Damaris and others with them. So it wasn't a complete success in that everybody who heard him believed. Paul got a response just like we often get. Some heard him and mocked him. Some heard him and said, well, that's interesting. I'd like to hear more about it later. And some heard and believed. And what I've found is that if you take, the population in general, that's the three responses that you're going to get. Some people are going to hear you, they're going to mock you. Some people are going to hear you and they say, well, that's interesting. I'll like to hear more about it later. You've planted a seed. Maybe you get to lead that person to the Lord. Maybe somebody comes along later and does. But you've planted a seed. And then some people hear and they believe. And that's why you do what you do, because there are some that hear and believe. Questions on Paul's adventures in Athens? All right. Well, we have did I not do? What did I do? The last three questions. I thought okay. Y'all want to do those? Sure, I forgot. You need. All right. Paul acknowledges that the Athens were very religious, yet they're ignorant of the one true God. In what way is this a commentary on our society and our churches today? You can be religious without knowing God. I think that could be the commentary of a lot of people in our churches today. You're very religious, but you don't know the one true God. I think Billy Graham said that he estimated about 50%, about half of all the people on the church rolls are lost. And, his estimates are probably pretty close to right. Why was the resurrection of the dead a point of controversy for the Greek philosophers? Well, Greeks believed that only the spirit was immortal. Flesh was corrupt and it was evil. So basically what I do in the flesh, it doesn't matter, because that's not the part that's going to survive. It's the spirit that's immortal. So, if I do good in the flesh, if I do evil in the flesh, it doesn't matter, because the flesh is going away anyway. The flesh is evil, the flesh is corrupt. My greatest hope is that one day I die and I shed the flesh, and my spirit, which is immortal, that is what survives. The good part of me survives. Paul starts talking about the flesh being resurrected, the dead being resurrected, and they're going, wait a minute. That's not my hope. My hope is not that this evil, corrupt flesh would live on. My hope is that the spirit would live on. Now, of course, Paul understood that when you're resurrected in Christ, the mortal will put on immortality, and the corrupt will put on incorruptible. But this is something that the Greeks didn't understand, so they had to hear more about it. They had to understand it. Again, they had been taught wrong, and so sometimes when we've been taught wrong, we have to unlearn what we've learned. And the skill of Paul to engage debaters without being drawn into debate. What should we learn from this? Stay on point. Satan's great weapon is to try to sidetrack you. And someone who is under conviction, they will try to get you to talk about everything else in the world except Jesus. And they'll want to ask you, well, now, you'll be trying to talk to them about Jesus, and they'll be saying, well, now, if Noah really had a boat to put all the animals on it, then why are the dinosaurs extinct? Ken Ham has the answer to that in Kentucky, by the way. You can go see; he'll tell you all about it. But don't get sidetracked into that stuff. I don't know what to say on that other than Just stay focused on Jesus. It's about Jesus. It's not about you being able to answer every question that they might have. And what I found is I will talk to anybody about the Bible. I will talk to anybody about Jesus. But I found that debating someone serves little or no purpose, really. I mean, if someone just wants to debate with you and try to prove that you're wrong, especially if there's a group of unbelievers there, that really doesn't serve a lot of purpose, because they're going to try to back you into some corner and make you look stupid, and when they make you look stupid, they're going to make the gospel look stupid. So talk to them about Jesus. Stay on point. Don't get sucked into some sort of debate that really has no purpose, no meaning. So, questions? They do, yeah. 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 So, So I'll give you an example. One of our youth today was involved in a witnessing opportunity with one of their friends. And they texted, the reason I know this, because they texted Trey, and they're like, what do I do? This person's asking questions that I don't have an answer to. But the question was this: they were trying to sidetrack it on the whole homosexuality question. This lost person was, and they were saying that in Leviticus, I believe it was Leviticus 13, where it says if a man lies with a woman, if a man lies with a man like as he lies with a woman, it's an abomination to the Lord. Blah blah blah. You can look it up. Anyway, and this person was saying, well, that word should be translated boy. And so it's not talking about homosexuality, it's a prohibition against pedophilia. If a man lies with a boy. So Trey's coming, Trey comes in, he's like, hey, I want you to do me a favor. I said, what? He said, get down your Hebrew Bible and look up a word. I said, oh, there's nothing I'd rather do than that. So we did a word study. Well, come to find out, the word doesn't mean boy, it means male. It can even be used of male animals. And I told Trey, I said, this is the end of the argument right here, because the same word that's translated man here, or male here, in Genesis is translated male, where it says God created them male and female. Because Adam wasn't created a boy, he was created a man. So he's like, okay, but I'm just saying, here is even a teenager, one of our teenagers that's trying to witness, and you can see how easily the conversation can get twisted around into something that doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus. Just an attempt to try to get it off of the conviction of the cross. So anyway, I just thought that was, I thought it was amazing, but I thought it was kind of neat that our kids are bold enough to be sharing Christ at school. So I thought that was encouraging as well. All right, I have a brief video. I think it's